One more time, singing hallelujah. Singing hallelujah.
Can you get 4 of the cardstocks? Can you get 4 of the cardstocks and get a piece of paper? Can you get 4 pages? Can you get 4 things that like the harder paper that for breakout groups, so that there's 4 groups that are writing, 1 person writing for the group.
You mean like the cardstock?
Yeah, and just only 4 of those because they're only going to need one. They're only going to need 1 spokesperson writing for the group, you know, and then that way, you know, when I everything.
Food. Provision. Amen. You can have a seat. Pastor Mike. Thank you, guys.
Check. Now it's on. Maybe I just need to move it forward. You know, I think it's just the mic. We had it resized the other day. There we go. All right. That's why we do it on Saturday instead of Sunday, right? It all comes together. How's everyone doing today? Oh, man. You know, instead of saying good, I want you guys to say unbelievable. Oh, that's better. You know, it's neither good nor bad. It's no matter where you're at right now, you can say and be happy. It's unbelievable. You're having a great life. Today we're starting a model that is really near and dear to my heart, something that has been really stewing. And I think that some of the greatest things God does in our hearts, he lets it stew. He lets us go through the difficulties, the challenges, the trials, because what happens is a lot of times through difficulty, you start to look for a better way. If you find something that's not working, what's the crazy cycle? Doing the same thing, expecting what? Different results. Do you guys believe that happens in ministry? I believe it happens in ministry more often than not because we're used to doing things a certain way. And when you get a group of people together, let's say 100 people, you can see that there's issues in what we call traction, our ability to lead well. The bigger the group gets. You add 200 people in, it gets even more difficult. You add 300 people in, it gets even more. You're starting to see that every single time you scale by about 50 to 100, you have new personalities, you have new problems, but you also have new people. All of those things aren't bad things. Those are all good things. It's growth. Growth means that every single time you grow, you're also going to have more complications because as things get bigger, they don't get easier. They actually get more complicated. I'll give you an example. When I first became married with my wife, it was pretty easy. You know, we had to figure out how to get a job, both of us, how to pay the bills. We had to figure out maybe at the most, I think, how are we going to do the water bill, the electric bill? We were broke when we first started, you know, getting married and everything we did together. Now, looking after that, you have your very first kid. It's almost overwhelming because you've never done it before. Especially if you're a guy. I feel like girls are like wired that way. Guys, we're not. Our first kid changes us, men. Would you guys agree? Men, can I get some amens? You're just leaving me hanging here. All right. I'm the only guy. When you start with your very first kid, it's a little overwhelming. You feel a lot of pressure. You're like, how am I going to take care of my wife, let alone a whole nother life, especially a life that you feel is so delicate, so gentle. And then you figure it out, and then you go to kid number 2, and you almost forget all the things you went through with kid number 1, you know, The first 2 years, the smelly diapers, the colds, the fevers, the whininess, the late nights, the tantrums. You forget it all and you tell your wife, hey, we should have a second kid. And then you have a second kid and you're going through it all over again. And you have amnesia. You go through it and you're like drinking through a fire hydrant. And you get years by. And, for me, it was Benji and Becca. And it's like, hey, we should have another kid. And then you go to 4 kids. You skip the 3rd kid and you go straight to the 4th kid. And now you're really dealing with things because what you did with the very first kid doesn't work now that you have 4. It just doesn't work. The groceries are the first thing that you feel. You go to the store and your wife gives you the honey-do list. She gives you all the priorities and you're supposed to sit there and she has prioritized everything, every expense, but you have the things that you like. But babe, what about my ghee butter? What about my Wagyu fat? What about all these little things that I used to like? I remember I used to afford chiropractor service, all right, before I had kids. So I can complain about not having these things now, but the priorities change because my kids came into my life and I might not be able to go out to dinners. Might not be able to afford to do a bunch of things at South Beach or a bunch of fun things in our city. But what I do get to do is family. And each time my family gets a little bit bigger, what ends up happening is even though things are tighter in certain areas, there's always joy in my home. There's always happiness in my home. I see my kids and I see how much they just love God. They love this church. They love life. And I see it as the greatest responsibility that God has given me right next to the church. And it's an awesome thing to see where you're starting out and you say, how can I handle it? But you know what's crazy? If you stick with it, you usually figure it out. You figure out how to save money by buying diapers in bulk. You figure out how to not buy milk anymore at Publix because it costs too much, and you go to BJ's or you go to Costco. You start to make adjustments because what's coming. And you're getting ready not just for your life now, but for all the lives that you get to be responsible for. Guys, it's the same thing about families, the same thing about church. Nothing's really different about it other than we're just a bigger family. And we have more families that we deal with. We have more needs. When there's trials, there's more trials. When there's problems, there's more problems. But guys, when there's joy, there's more joy. And one of the most joyous things they get to see in church is getting to see people worship, getting to see people really give their heart over to what God has for them. And for me, one of the most special times in Scripture, going over today's model for deep and wide, is the story of Moses when he moves out of Egypt, which for them was slavery, and he moves into the desert. Things did not just get better overnight. No, actually, for Moses, things got progressively worse. And what I mean by that was he thought he had a system before that worked, being a shepherd, taking care and tending to sheep, hanging out with his father-in-law, Jethro, and his family. But now he has done this very quick exodus, as you can see that he was going to get killed. Same thing with all these other people. If they stopped midway, you saw what happened. Pharaoh changed his mind. And midway, he said, yeah, I'll let my people go. But then what does he do? He puts an order out to kill him and meet him up where the water was at. Now, I look at all the things that Moses has gone through, and you see how God holds the water up. He does all these things. He takes out the armies. He sets them up towards their new path, and then he promises them a distant promised land that they're going to be going to. But now they're in the desert, and not everything's feeling so what? Great. What are some elements in a desert? Dryness, water, heat, sand. No one likes sand. Food, shelter. The list goes on. There were more problems going into the desert for a lot of them than staying in Egypt. It's all about perspective, right? Faith. Faith in the person of God. Faith in what God is doing. And when I share this story with you guys, I want you to open up to Exodus here, Exodus 18. Exodus 18. And I'm going to read it with you just because for sake of time, I think I can get through it faster. But Moses has started to lead at this point, and he is burning out. He is getting tired, and he's not being efficient or effective. I need you guys to say efficient. I need you guys to say effective. Now, what's so interesting is every single leadership style is broken up into those two categories. Most of the people that are really good at being efficient, they're not always good at being effective. And most of the people who are really good at being effective aren't always as good at being efficient. It's almost like leaders and managers need to be working together. And when leaders and managers work together, they get multiplication. They get to a healthier place. And I was reading through this story. You have one guy for Jethro's idea where you could say that he has a much better, bigger picture than Moses does at that time. Moses is caught up with the task of everybody. I mean everybody. And they say that there was anywhere between 500,000 to 1 million that went through and left this Exodus. So imagine 500,000 to 1 million people, and you were just only used to being what? A shepherd with maybe a handful of servants, a handful of people. Was that a small change or was that a major change? Was that easy or was that hard? I think the level of difficulty would be for most of you insurmountable. I think that would be a good word to use. But I want you to hear it here from the story, and I want you guys to glean it because we are going to have a workshop. There is something you guys are going to do, and I'm asking you today to have an open heart. I'm asking you today to have an open mind. I'm asking you today to come into ministry today knowing it's not just about me, it's about everybody in this room. And also, guys, everybody who's not in this room. Because there are leaders at Lifted Church that are going to change the world, and they are just one leader away from doing it. They're one person away from making a great decision that's going to change everything else, not just for your church, but for their life. Let's read the story of Exodus 18 with Jethro. Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian, heard about everything that God had done for Moses and for God's people, Israel, when the Lord brought Israel out of Egypt. Now Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, had taken Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her back along with her 2 sons, one of whom was named Gershom, because Moses had said, I have been a resident alien in a foreign land, a sojourner. And the other Eliezer, because he had said, the God of my father was my helper and rescued me from Pharaoh's sword. Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, along with Moses' wife and sons, came to him in the wilderness. All right, so this isn't like an Airbnb. This is not the Hilton. This is not the Ritz-Carlton. Maybe you need to circle wilderness there just to give you context. He's in the wilderness where he was camped at the mountain of God. He sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law, Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons. Now, what I find interesting is before you read this story, a lot of us will presume that the 10 commandments have been given to them, that they understand all the rules and regulations of the society, that they know everything that God has planned for them. Up until this point, none of that's happened. They haven't heard God's voice in a cloud yet. They have no context of why Moses is the guy over anybody else. They're going to get clarity in the next 2 chapters. But until those next 2 chapters, guys, he's going to get a ministry proposal given to him, a model, you could say, on how to do ministry and be effective and efficient. And he's still going to have to implement this with the people. And I think it's interesting. He says, Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, along with Moses' wife and sons, came to him in the wilderness. He was camped at the mountain of God. He sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law, Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and 2 sons. So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, bowed down, and then he kissed him. They asked each other how they had been and went into the tent. They spent some time together. And verse 8, Moses recounted to his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardships that confronted them on the way, and how the Lord rescued them. Jethro rejoiced over all the good things the Lord had done for Israel when he rescued them from the power of the Egyptians. You know, I kind of feel like with this is our story is look at everything God's done up until this point. You guys can see not just the years and years we were West Kendall Baptist and Miami Baptist and now Lifted Church, but let's just go back in the past 4 years since we've become Lifted Church. We have seen God do so much in such a small amount of time. And I think one of the most amazing things that's happened in just the past year is how we weren't even really looking for a building per se. My dad's just driving along a street and he sees the sprung and he goes, oh, I wonder, I dream, I think God could do something here. And my dad's always got that kind of heart. And I remember Dan was, hey, let me look into it too. And he makes a phone call to the sprung people that do the building. And he says, how much is that building that they have? And it was $2.7 million in a box. That's how much that building cost. But mind you, they have to, 1, be able to sell it. 2, they have to be able to move it. And then 3, we would have to figure out a way to get it here. Now, all of that being said, God did everything from that point forward. I mean everything. I mean down from the fact that we didn't have the money, God provided the person to be able to actually give a check of $75K where I knew in 1 weekend we were either going to have the building or we weren't. It was either going to happen in faith or it wasn't. And I remember I'm at a meeting, a dinner table meeting with all the finance committee. And these guys are pretty wealthy and they have good business prowess and understanding. But you know what was funny in that meeting is they were all telling me how to do a pitch and how to do things. And I was just feeling in my heart of hearts and my gut that we just need to bring it before the people of the Lord and God is going to provide. And if it doesn't on Monday, it was going to get sold to somebody else. So literally on that Sunday, everything hinged on you guys being able to provide $75K. And that $75K, guys, bought a $2.7 million building. Then that's not even the hurdle alone. The next hurdle is how do you get a loan when you don't have a loan set up where you can't get above $1 million? Do you guys realize that we could not get a loan past $700,000 to $800,000? And that was a battle. And we also had to figure out how to be able to pay for the move because you don't just pay for the building, you got to pay for the deconstruction of it, put it into the crates, and then moved over to our property. That was a whole nother process that happened that God took care of. And then the hardest part was on the actual loan itself, where we were able to get a loan for $3 million, which I was told by about 10 banks that we would be lucky to even get 800. Now, I'm only saying all that because this is everything God's done right up into this point right now. Yeah. But why am I connecting it to the story? Because they had seen a lot of miracles already, right? Moses had seen the seas part. He had seen God do everything else. But here they are in the desert, and Jethro's rejoicing over all the good things the Lord has done for Israel when he rescued them from the power of the Egyptians. He said, "Blessed be the Lord," Jethro proclaimed, "who rescued you from the power of Egypt and from the power of Pharaoh. He has rescued the people from under the power of Egypt. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods, because he did wonders when the Egyptians acted arrogantly against Israel." Now, I think it's interesting. You could have hung your hat up there and said, we had a great, great time in the desert. We've accomplished what we set out to do. Let's go back to Egypt now. There's nothing here. But that's not how the story goes, does it? They're not going back. God is taking them somewhere. And maybe you need to tap your neighbor and say, God is taking me somewhere. He's not leaving you in the middle of nowhere. He's not leaving you down the creek without a paddle. He says here, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifice to God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law in God's presence. The next day, Moses sat down to judge the people, and they stood around Moses from morning until evening. Now, if you've ever done ministry, it can kind of feel like that sometimes. From morning until evening. And you're like, where did the time go? You almost get so much into ministry mode that you're almost going from day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year, and you can even fall into the same crazy pattern, doing the same things, expecting what? Come on, guys, doing the same things, expecting different results. Well, this is what's going on for Moses. And when Moses' father-in-law saw everything he was doing for them, he asked, what is this thing you're doing for the people? Why are you alone sitting as judge while all the people stand around you from morning until evening? Verse 15, Moses replied to his father-in-law, because the people come to me to inquire of God. Whenever they have a dispute, I can tell you as a pastor, people come to me and they blow my phone up about disputes. They'll come to me for that. I can tell you as a pastor, as it comes to me, I make decisions between one man and another. And he's also talking about I teach them God's statutes and laws. When you teach anything, guys, it's like preparing a meal. The meal doesn't cook itself. You know, try doing that with your wife and just be like, hey man, this meal just showed up here if your wife cooked a really good meal. Be a good way for her to never cook you a meal again. The meal doesn't cook itself, right? A good person, it's a chef, right? What are they doing? They're chopping up the onions. They're chopping up the tomatoes. They're getting the food. And even before they did all that, they got the grocery list together. They got the ingredients. They got the seasoning. They are getting everything prepared, and then they sear it, they cook it, and then they set the table. There's an entire what? Process that goes into preparing a meal. There's an entire process that goes into teaching. So it's taken up the majority of his time. In verse 17, he says, what you're doing, this is what Jethro says, all his time, the way he's been using it, what you're doing is not good. Moses' father-in-law said to him, you will certainly wear out both yourself, but what was the condition here too? What's next to it? And these people who are with you. You guys ever been tired of ministry? You ever felt the word burnt out? You know where it comes from? It comes from a lack of vision. It comes from a lack of resources. But the majority of the time, it comes from a poor system. It doesn't mean that things aren't going to get any harder going on in the future. It means we got to get better. He says, certainly you'll wear out both the people and yourself and these people who are with you, because the task is too heavy for you. You can't do it alone. Guys, we can't do this thing called church alone. There's a reason why it's called a community. There's a reason why it's called church. Now listen to me. I will give you some advice. You know, when your father-in-law says, listen to me, you got to listen up, right? He says, listen to me. I'll give you some advice. God be with you. You be the one to represent the people before God and bring their case to him. Instruct them about the statutes and laws and teach them the way to live and what they must do. But you should select from all the people, what does it say here? Able men. Doesn't say disabled men. All right? It says able men. Able men that what? Fear the Lord. Number one, they love God. Number two, they're trustworthy and hasting dishonest profit. And it says place them, the people, as commanders of what? Thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They should judge the people at all times. Then they can bring you every major case, but judge every minor case themselves. Essentially, you know, God is not trying to get you to major in the minors. You ever wonder where that statement comes from? It comes right here from the Bible. Don't major in the minors. So he says, in this way, you will lighten your load, and they will bear it with you. If you do this and God so directs you, you will be able to endure, and all these people will be able to go home satisfied. Moses listened to his father-in-law and did everything he said. So Moses chose able men from all Israel and made them leaders over the people as commanders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They judged the people at all times. They would bring the hard cases to Moses, but they would judge every minor case themselves. Moses let his father-in-law go, and he journeyed to his own land. Jethro goes back home, and a little bit later on, there's going to be the entire part where there's a cloud of smoke around God's mountain, and you guys know what happens there. The 10 Commandments come. And even before he gives them the 10 Commandments, he said, I, God, will show the people, not just through the smoke, not just through the trumpet, but I will let them hear my voice. When they heard God's voice, they said, God, no, not you. Moses, you talk. They were so afraid of God's voice when they heard him talk, they wanted Moses to be the spokesperson because they were afraid of their lives. The fear of the Lord was the beginning of wisdom. Literally, not just figuratively, here in this passage. Why did I say this today? Well, we have the deep and wide leadership model that I've been working on, and this is going to come right out of this scripture in Jethro. When we look at leadership, the biggest problem in leadership today is the 80-20 rule, which is essentially, guys, 20% of the church is doing 80% of the work. Would you guys agree that's pretty much true for most places? This is something that, I'd love to see change. A healthy church is 100% of the people doing 100% of the work. Kids can do something, young adults can do something, older adults can do something. Everybody's got a part to play. But why does this happen? Well, just like Moses, leaders can become overwhelmed by trying to do everything. Now, how do you pick the right thing versus the wrong thing? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. We need to go deeper as leaders, and we need to develop a wider reach. Now, I have a picture here of Moses. Moses was leading, guys, but was he leading well? Now, I know this one's a little cropped out, but I had a different picture. I just changed the scale. But my point being is you guys can see how in every single way, everything was being funneled to who? To Moses. All 500,000 people, all 1 million people, all being funneled to the same person, no leadership. Now, the ideal way of doing leadership is imagine a dot right here, right here, right here, right here. Let's say they had 4, because he put 4 here, and he had categories of them going, each scaling down. When you have a deep and wide network, what it does, the depth shows the maturity, the wideness shows the influence. So when we think on the beginning part, we always start with influence. Maxwell says leadership is influence. And so when we're starting a ministry, you're never going deep initially, you're going wide. You're always going wide before you go deep. When you build a house and you build a foundation, you're always building the foundation first, and then you're building on top of that solid foundation. And so when we look at leadership and we think deep and wide, the wide aspect is not just you as an individual, but who is alongside me. When you have leaders beside you, my leaders are Dan, or Bob, or Pastor Rob, my mom, different people in the church. A lot of you guys are leaders at different levels. But we have these main leaders in church, and the reason why they're set up that way is that they're supposed to, underneath them, scale out. And the same thing with you. Imagine you, and you say, well, Mike, I'm not a senior pastor. Well, you could lead 3 people, where you have 1 person you mentor, and you have 2 people out of that 1 person that you follow up with, and guess what you just did? You just did deep and wide, just by adding 3 people. I'm not asking you guys to take on the entire church. I'm asking you to take on other people that aren't just your family. How am I helping them? Not just how are they helping me. When it's only how are they helping me, that's not church mentality. That's not leadership mentality. We got to be a team and work together. Let's see where this is going. Deep and wide principles. These are the 4 that I broke down that I'm going to actually be utilizing, guys, in everything that we do, ministry from this point forward. And when you guys are developing leadership in any ministry, name a ministry, guys, right now, any ministry. Production. If you're working in production, you would do this list right here. You would prioritize what is the most important thing. Well, for production, what's the most important thing? Sound. Without sound, they can't hear the sermon. So everything goes out of sound. Then you have the look, how it's viewed, the visual. You start to see all these different levels just on prioritization. What would have to happen to have a really good Sunday? Well, they would have to practice beforehand. So a big part of prioritizing is how are we going to practice it? I think one thing we're fundamentally missing here at Lifted that we can be better at, that we can do better, is training. And I'm not talking about just the pastor's training. Me training you right now is so that you go and train later. This training is actually helping you create a funnel so that when you create a leader, you are walking them through these steps. Let's do worship. What is a prioritization for worship? Tina, what happens if you don't know the songs on Sunday and the back goes down and you can't read? Right? So is it better just to memorize the songs if you know them ahead of time? Does that help, memorizing the songs? Okay. Okay. Now, I think it's very interesting. You used a word called excellence. And excellence is a very funny word when we're talking in terms of nuances. When you're developing innovation and you're doing anything new, Steve Jobs, he had a thing called Lisa. And before he ever had the iPhone, he had a massive box that nobody would buy. And he was trying to scale down from a box of 10,000, and it would cost $10,000 to get that box. And then he went to 5,000. And then ultimately one day in 2007, he was able to introduce the iPhone. Now, all his peers, Tina, didn't think that he was functioning in excellence, just so you know. So how do you deal with that dichotomy when you have people that don't understand how you get to excellence? Any good team, before they ever won, they lost. Can you lose in excellence? Can you have a loss, can you lose a game and still play your best? The answer is yes. Not every day is going to be a what? A W. Oh my goodness. I'm giving you guys Leadership 101 right now. This is so good for most of you who have this context where if I failed, then I didn't succeed. And a big part of excellence, getting to excellence, is understanding the failure points. It's understanding that, yes, you are starting something that you've never done before with people who have never done it before. And then if you change anything at any given time, if you don't do it for some period of time, you don't even know if the model worked. So we have this arbitrary idea of excellence, and really what we're doing is we're copying patterns of excellence from other people. But you have to organically do what works best for your church, what works best for your people, and works best for your organization. Meaning that sometimes you're going to do everything you can to function in excellence, which I look at excellence as giving your best, but sometimes your best just doesn't cut it. Moses was giving his best. Would you agree? So in humility, Moses is there, and he's getting instructed by whom? Jethro. I got some Jethros, like Tony's a Jethro type. I like Tony. Tony tells me things that I need to know, sometimes things I don't know, sometimes things I'm not doing, and I could see man, Tony's calling me a failure. But I don't look at it like that. I look at it like you guys have eyes that you can be in places I can't see. You guys have eyes that you can be in places that sometimes as leaders we can't go. And you can come to conclusions that we can't, but we also have eyes where we're in certain positions and we get to see a larger view as well. And we see things that you don't always see. So what needs to happen when we start to do this beginning part of prioritizing? We list out what we see. We write it down. This is not negativity. This is not critiquing. This is not critical, but it is critical thinking. And critical thinking means looking at our problems, looking at each ministry, not just the whole, but also the part, and saying, how can we get this whole thing together on Sunday morning to function better than the Sunday before? That's really the goal of Sunday morning. How can we be better every Sunday, a little bit better than we were last Sunday? I'm never judging us on the other pattern. It's progress. It's how we're progressing, it's how we're prioritizing. Moving into train. What would training be? Equip others to lead effectively. So how do we train? What would we call training? I'll go back to worship. Tina, what would be training? Okay, so they show up to practice. Dan, if I show up to worship team, I'm coming up here on stage. First time, all right? You're about to have practice. You gave a set list the week before, and it's practice time. I don't know any of the songs. I'm a guitar player. I don't know any of the rhythm part, and I don't know any of the chords. Am I going to be on for that week? But why not? I have the right heart. I'm here. I want to be on the worship team. Wait. So I have to do 3 practices? You're telling me I have to practice on my own, and then I have to practice with the team, and then I have to practice again by playing on Sunday? Oh, man. But you see how most people think? I want to show you guys because I don't have a problem with this with anybody. The most successful people, they find a way to go to the gym. They find a way to go out with their wives. They find a way to take their kids to tournaments all throughout the country, let alone the city. I know people that do all of these things, but they still don't do this in spiritual training, in church. And it's a dichotomy. It's their prioritizations. Remember, there's a priority a long time ago. As for me and my house, we will. Oh, it sounds so good coming off of the tongue, but committing to that is a whole different thing, right? We can say it, but can we live it? As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Oh, church, how we contextualize that. We are good at that. So what does it really mean to train, equip others to lead effectively? It means that there's a sacrifice that occurs at the level of self for other people's self-interest. That means sometimes you will be at a loss to get them to a win. I want you to hear me. You will be at a loss momentarily to get them to a win. But eventually, when they win, you win. And when they win and you win, guess what? Everyone wins. Do you see how teamwork works now? We get to the next one. Delegate. This is the hardest one because delegation and the idea of excellence, we can have this competition where we say, well, I want to delegate it, but this person's competency or capacity is not where I need it to be. So I can't get there. No, you can delegate it, but you would have to prioritize with them, train them, and then delegate to them. And then finally, guys, what do we get to? Multiplication. Guys, this is where the bottleneck stops. This is where you get your time back in ministry. This is where you start to see teams and other people develop where you don't have to be doing it every single day or every single week. But initially, if you look at any person who has started a business, they are putting a lot of time into the actual job. And then any money they make, they bring that money where? Back into the job until the job is what we call profitable. How do you know when your job is profitable? When you're just meeting the margins? When you're just meeting the status quo? When you actually can show real, equitable growth. And now, when I look here at multiplication, that's where we're at then. You're not just coasting. You're not just maintaining. Now, multiplication is based on the idea of thriving. Okay, so let's go through it. Jethro's advice, prioritize. Jethro saw Moses was handling too much. Exodus 18, 13 through 18. He told Moses to what? Prioritize his responsibilities. Focus on the big issues. All right? Leaders must decide what they can handle and what others can do. And this also means if you're a good leader, you're good at pushing people. And I know a lot of us today, we don't like to be pushed. We don't like to be challenged. I'm going to tell you flat out, you don't like leadership then. Because any good coach is going to push you beyond what you are normally capable of doing. The coach's job is to see your potential. The coach's job is not to let you settle at where you're at, but to get you to where you need to be so that you can be all that God has created you to be. Not settling, elevating. transitioning and transforming to God's kingdom, not just your own. Step 1, prioritize for impact. Leaders must focus on what is essential. And here's a big ask: what rules, tasks, and decisions are only for you? And what can others do? Now, I know that nobody's going to come up there on Sunday and prep the message and do my sermon. That's something what I would say is only for me, at least for right now. But other things, there's there. I can delegate. Dan can delegate. People at church can delegate. And when you're delegating, you're not dumping. And I want to be very clear. Delegating is not dumping. Delegating is passing. And sometimes in delegating, it's like football. You'll have a fumble. You'll have an interception. It'll come running back to you, and you're like, oh my goodness, this didn't work. I did exactly what you said, Mike. I delegated, and I'll go back to your prioritization and your training, and I'll say, no, you didn't delegate. You skipped step 1 and step 2 and went straight to step 3. Here's the target, guys. It's a big vision in the center, and we're getting all the responsibilities to work around it. What's the big thing that we do? Out of all the ministries, small groups, DNA, women's ministry, men's ministry, what are we all funneling to? Sunday morning, guys. Sunday morning. Why Sunday? Why Sunday? It's when people show up to go to church. It's when lost people show up. It's when saved people show up. It's when lost people who think they're saved show up. All of the groups, it's when they show up. So what do we prioritize around for impact? Sunday morning. And this is a shift in thinking for a lot of us who don't see it this way, because God has used the church as the means to fight against the things of this world and be the light and the salt to the world. You individually are not the church. It's the collective. When the church comes together, that's the church. Jethro's solution: train leaders. Jethro advised Moses to train others to share the load. Moses was to show leaders the way to teach the rules and equip them to lead. Here's the lesson. Leadership requires teaching and preparing others to lead effectively, which means, kind of like the analogy I used in the beginning, when you put a meal together, it's going to take some time. But think of it like that. When you're trying to lead someone new, I got to go out and I got to go get some things from the grocery store. And these might be the things that I need to help this person in leadership. And so you put out the list. Ding, 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 ding. And as you work through that, now you get into how I execute within that in the training. And then you do that for teaching. Maybe they need a book. How many of you guys are reading a book right now in your own personal life? Raise your hand. I want you to keep those hands up. If you're reading a book, keep your hand up. Don't put it down yet. How many of you are reading a book that actually helps you in the area of ministry that you're in, though? Keep your hand up. Reading a book that helps you outside of the Bible, that helps you in your ministry context. All right, now even more than that, keep your hand up, are reading books that help you in leadership, an actual leadership book right now. Everyone's hand should be up, just so you know. If your hand's not up, you're not reading things. If you're not reading things to grow and to learn, it shows you your investment. Guys, you don't grow passively here. You grow actively. If you engage in what God has gifted you in, you engage in the gifts of the Holy Spirit and don't become a wicked what? Lazy servant, which God says he's going to take one day and throw into the fire. We want to be good and faithful servants. And good and faithful servants are always looking to grow. They're teaching themselves. So how do you teach others? You got to learn yourself. You got to first become the student before you can become the teacher. Step 2, to train a lead. Training is essential for growth. Leaders must not just delegate, but equip others. Leaders are developed through mentorship, through teaching, and through hands-on experience. One of my favorite things in production, guys, is when I see a middle schooler come across and they're interested in some type of ministry and they jump on production. I got adults that I have not been able to get in production for literally over 12 years of being here. But I have middle school boys and high school boys that I've been able to get back there on a camera or something else, and they have stepped in fully willing to get involved. Why do I say that? Because when it looks like it's something you don't know, that you're not great at, you're like, well, I would need to get trained in it and I'd have to learn. And I'm a little bit older now. I don't know tech, or I don't know this camera. I don't know these things, but it's not the matter of you knowing it or not. It's your willingness. If you're willing to learn, you'll be willing to grow. And if you're not willing to learn, you'll never grow. Jethro's structure. Here's the deep and wide concept. Do you guys see here the breakdown? This is a fleet commander. Now, the fleet commander, he is not over each one of these departments. Each one of these departments, he has broken down, and this is just a breakdown to show you guys a hierarchy chart. And all of you in every ministry should be developing a hierarchy chart. Someone that is direct to you, and you're building out your wide. For the next couple weeks, I don't want you to focus on the depth yet. They should not be developing a bunch of people underneath them, because they themselves are still learning and they have not stepped into being a leader yet. Before they can lead, they have to learn how to, come on guys, follow. Great, I love it. Before you can lead, you gotta learn how to follow. And so you need to find out if you're a leader or not. You wanna find out real quick, create your hierarchy and see that width come up. And this is how you know if they're direct to you, if they're listening, because you can give them the task and you can train them and you can prioritize with them and they get the thing done. What I love here is I have the fleet commander. He has here a assistant chief of naval staff training, commander maritime operations, commander UK maritime operations, and then he has amphibious forces, commandant general Royal Marines. I think it's kind of interesting that even the military and some of the greatest organizations in the world, they all use a hierarchy model. If you go to work, whether you know it or not, you know your boss, he has a hierarchy model. And whether it's management, whatever the system is, whether they share this role at the top, it's still a hierarchy model. You need to develop one as well. Jethro told Moses to appoint leaders over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. That means all of us should be doing this at this church now that we're 400 to 600. You guys realize that we average 400 to 600 if you go from Friday all the way through Sunday? Do you think that Pastor David can do the follow-up for all those people, guys? Do you guys know that follow-up ministry is one of the most neglected ministries in the church? And here's the crazy one, it's the most impactful. We think it's first impressions. Well, it is major. First impressions is about people coming to your church. Follow-up is about people coming back to your church. And it's one thing to have people come to your church. It's an entire other thing to have people want to come back to your church. And you know where they come back to? They come back to where they were loved, where they were appreciated, maybe even where they were pushed a little bit to be more than what God has called them to be, to live in their true potential. Guys, we have to be bold, and we have to invite people to do these things. These leaders would handle the smaller matters, freeing Moses to focus on the big issues. Delegation here, guys, multiplies leadership and prevents burnout. You see someone burning out, it's someone who's not prioritizing, not training, and not using hierarchies. Guys, if we do this, I'm telling you, however tired you feel in ministry, if you do this properly, you guys can succeed. You guys can experience better ministry. Step 3, guys, delegate to power, delegate to empower. Delegation empowers others to lead. Trust your leaders with authority and responsibility, just as Moses trusted his. Imagine Moses, he's the one who got to see the seas part. He's the one God called. He's the one who's all the way here at the top, and he can be up here, coming up here, and it's like, Pastor Mike on Sunday, he's preaching. But I can sit here and I can come over to Tony. I can listen to Tony. Tony's got some good ideas. I'll have a Jorge come up to me and say, hey, Mike, there's certain things on the translation. I don't know translation, and I definitely don't know how to speak Spanish. I'm still praying for the gift of tongues. It hasn't come yet. But with Jorge, he knows 2 languages. I know 1. So I don't come to Jorge as the know-it-all. I come to Jorge and I say, okay, Jorge, what am I doing that could be better? And Jorge gives me, hey, Mike, can I get this right before the message? And can I get this clarified? Can I get these verses? He doesn't come and dump on me more problems. He comes on me and says, I want to seek out solutions. What a breath of fresh air when we have people in ministry that want to see solutions just as much as they want to point out the problem. We are professional pointers of problems, but we aren't always professional at bringing in good solutions. Jethro's legacy, multiply leaders. Jethro's advice allowed Moses to multiply his impact by raising up many leaders. This resulted in more effective leadership for the entire nation. So if this is a model, guys, that can work for an entire nation of 500,000 to 1 million, do you think it can work for our church? If we just implement something that says, hey, I know every other church has a language that they use, but we only need to memorize 4 things in every ministry. So that even you guys as problem solvers that are coming into ministry, you on the production team, you on the ministry teams, you doing men's group, women's group, even doing a life group, you guys can walk through this and you can think in your mind, hey, have I prioritized? And hey, have I trained? Have I delegated? And then have I multiplied? Multiplication is the goal. Leaders must produce more leaders, not just followers. This is where the bottleneck happens in churches, where they get to a certain size and they grow back down. They get to a certain size, you cannot outgrow and outpace from the leaders that you develop. You grow proportionately to the leaders that you develop. If you develop many leaders, you'll have a bigger church. If you develop frightened leaders, scared leaders, every single time they get a big problem, they will tuck tail and run. Step 4, multiply for kingdom growth. Multiplication is the ultimate goal. As you train, delegate, and empower, you create leaders who can train others. Now you just multiplied yourself at a rate of 1x to 5x to 10x, and you can see that where before you start out the year, do you realize right now you might have 1 ministry, but you could be doing 10 ministries if you had 10 leaders. But you have satisfied for 1 because you don't know how to be a leader of 10. You do not know your own lid right now. You do not know your own capacity. You do not know how far God can take you. It's all contingent on your faith in the person of Jesus. Now, why is this all pivoting to the Brave 300? Guys, we have a major event coming up, and we are weeks away. And what I mean by this is you look at the tables are easy to solve. Getting people there is easy to solve because it means that I can break down the numbers just on the people in this group alone, and you can see this is what I can break down and do. What can you do? And if everybody comes into this mentality with what we can do, not only will we have an effective gala, but guys, the Brave 300 is more than a gala. We're leaving the gala, launching the series of the Brave 300, and we're going to build on it every Sunday, and we're going to help people see what God is already doing and what God is going to do in faith. But we have to start being the people that believe it more than the people on the outside. Guys, if you don't believe in here, I got people sometimes in church, they're like, oh, I don't do the gala. And I'm like, you don't do, that's like being in Egypt and saying, I don't do the crossing. What happened to the slaves that didn't cross with Moses? They stayed in Egypt. They stayed in slavery. And there's a lot of people who live as Christian slaves, and they stay compartmentalized in their own minds because they're trapped by their own limited thinking. Don't get comfortable in your walk. Nothing about Christianity says that you need to be comfortable. But everything about Christianity says that you need to be faithful. And when God does something, he's already bought the building. He's already brought the loan. He's already brought in the pieces. He's already brought in the architects. He's already brought these contractors. He's already brought the commissioners. Guys, do you realize even the commissioners want to see this building happen? Even the people in this city want to make it so that this building happens. God is literally taking off the red tape, and he's saying the only thing that's limiting us in this season is our faith. That's it. Whether you have a little bit of faith or a lot of faith, but it's your faith that's limiting you. Now, I have an exercise I want to do, but before I do want to finish with this verse. For many are called, but few are chosen. Matthew 22:14. It says here in Matthew 9:37, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. If you follow through on that scripture, it says, pray the Lord the harvest for the workers, and he'll bring the workers. Are you praying? Are you praying for multiplication? Are you praying not just for your own faithfulness? Are you praying for the faithfulness of others? That they would step up to the call that God has for them. Guys, I don't think it's any coincidence that it's called the Brave 300. Because I've already calculated, guys, we only need 300 faithful people to make this happen. And to me, 300 people, that's not that many. 300 people is scalable. 300 people is doable. I actually think that we're thinking too small. And I think we have to have bigger faith than even 300. I think we have to have even bigger faith than what we dream about just within the building. Because we still have another 6 acres after we build this building that could continue to be used. And guys, what I am seeing more than anything else right now, you talk about God's timing, schools across the state, public schools across the state are having issues getting teachers. And even principals, guys, principals across the state are keeping their kids homeschooled because they don't trust the system. Do you think it's a coincidence that we're building a Christian school? That we're pushing out Christian education? That, guys, we have parents lining up, begging, because they don't want to send their kids anywhere else. Guys, we owe it to the kids. We owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to God more than anything else. The reason why we owe it to God is because he gave it to us already. And what does it look like when God literally wraps up everything for you, miracle after miracle after miracle, and then we're like, God, I need another miracle. At some point, he's going to say, when are you going to roll up your sleeves and get to work and be faithful? This is the deep and wide. Take a picture, utilize it. We're going to make this into everything that we do ministry-wise. I have one I use for my staff that's smaller, but this is for prioritization of ministry. This is so that you guys can understand as we build out our leaders, the wide starts first and the deep happens underneath it. But the deep and wide concept, guys, are these 4 things. This is indicative to our church. I didn't borrow it from somebody. I didn't take it from anybody. I developed it for us because I think it's easy. I think it shows progress. And I think when we're looking at all of these things, we can see where the last buck drops, and we can say, maybe it's a training issue. Maybe it's a prioritization issue. Maybe it's a delegation issue, but it's never going to be a problem with multiplication if all the other 3 are being done. Now, I have an icebreaker for you guys all to do. I didn't mean to just talk to you today, but I want to actually get you to work. You're all going to break out into 4 groups, but I know that Isabel, before we do this, wanted to do something to get those groups together because it might be able to do 2 birds, 1 stone. My exercise is only 5 minutes, by the way.
That's fine. I'll talk loud. So, based on, okay, it's okay. I'll just talk loud. It looks good.
It's a good directional mic.
I know, right? Can you guys hear me? Okay. So, based on what Pastor Mike is saying, obviously, listening is good, but we need to put it into practice, right? So, what events are coming up? Gala and Trunk or Treat. And we want to take advantage of that now as we split into the groups, since we will be doing the icebreaker to already break out into certain groups that we will be serving. So we try to filter kind of the areas for Trunk or Treat, and then we'll be discussing Gala also in those groups. But if you, so we're going to move around a bit. Okay, get ready. We're going to do 4 groups. Where would you like them to sit, Mike? One on each end?
You're the one moving the groups wherever you want them to be.